In this episode, we'll be discussing topics related to mental health that some listeners may find distressing. We understand that these subjects can be challenging and your well being is important to us. Please take care of yourself as you listen, and if you need support, resources are available in the episode description. We will also include resources at the end of our episode. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to episode 8 of Absolute Faith Within. Today's episode is very special because we will be talking about mental health, something Erica and I are both extremely passionate about. And it is something that is often not necessarily associated with faith. However, as we dive deeper into the word and our understanding, we begin to see that our mental and spiritual health are so much more intertwined than we can imagine. And so today we'll be bringing on a very special guest who is a professional mental health clinician. But before we invite our guest up, we'd love to talk a little bit about our experience with mental health. So, to my very wonderful host, Erica, how are you doing today? Yes, thank you, Kiera. It's a little tiring right now since work just started again, school just started. So there's a lot of preparation, especially I'm going to a new school this school year, but still hanging there. How about you? Yeah, I feel you. I've been quite mentally exhausted, physically exhausted, but more mentally exhausted than anything over the past month. With a bit very busy work, but also kind of uh, a little bit of stress with kind of transitioning, making work transitions as well. But I'm doing well, and always positive and excited for what's next. Yeah, I think today's episode is definitely perfect for both of us as we talk about mental health. So going back to that, we're gonna dive into it. What do you think about mental health, Kira, first before I ask about your personal experiences with it? Well, I think mental health is very important to talk about. And I for myself growing up and not to get too deep into experience, it was always something that was taboo. Like, I think in society in general, it's taboo, but especially in, like, communities of color too, it's something that people don't talk about, and I think I've noticed in certain faith communities too, like, it's just sometimes there's this assumption that you will just get better if you have faith or you just keep working hard and that's all you need. And so um, I'm just really passionate about mental health, especially as someone who's been a caregiver for people who've dealt with various mental ailments. And so I'm really excited to talk about it because it's something that everyone should be thinking about and taking care of within themselves and for those around them. What about you? Yeah, I think for me too, mental health is so important, especially I think growing up, I've seen a lot of people who's gone through it. And a part of me is like, there are moments where I'm just like, I want to help them, but I don't know. And I think especially when I started teaching, seeing my student who's already going through it, I would see students who's having a panic attack in the middle of my class or sometimes I would talk to them and they will tell me that they're already on medication because they have some mental health issue. And just hearing that, I'm like, wow, it's so crazy how how important it is for us to take care about our mental health and to actually raise awareness about it. Because again, like what you said earlier, a lot of times people are not really aware of it or it's still a big taboo that people in the society don't really acknowledge about it as much. So for you, what are your personal struggle with mental health or experience with it? Yeah, I think growing up, I definitely have experienced anxiety. Like right now, I'd say generally I've had pretty stable or good mental health just because I am mindful of, scanning my thoughts, my body, noticing when I'm holding tension. But very early, yeah, very early on, from I think, yeah, 10 years old, I actually tried to commit suicide. And this was
I think largely, due to circumstance because it was like it almost felt contradictory. Like in general, like I've always been a very positive person, but
Mhm.
just due to, certain aspects of my home life, I was really frustrated. And so you know, think about that, but also to like reason with myself, like, what are you doing? Like you can't commit suicide. Like, you
Mhm.
have so much ahead of you. But I think even from a young age, just due to certain circumstances, that was something that I did try. And oh, thank God, it didn't. I guess stopped myself, or God, probably the
Mhm.
angels stopped me in the process. Whenever I would think of it, but I would say just growing up due to home life, I would experience anxiety. However, but I didn't always recognize it as that because growing up, I
Mhm.
was always that kid who was an overachiever. I did every single club. I did all AP honors classes, whatever it was, played sports. I was just active as much as possible. And these are all things that I genuinely enjoyed and that are good to do. But I
Mhm.
realized halfway through high school that, oh, I'm like, these are actually my coping mechanisms. The more that
Keep
I could,
yourself busy.
yeah, like keep myself busy would keep my mind away from problems or issues that were going on at home. And I never really like had to face my mental health issues until halfway through, like
Mhm.
especially going into like junior year of high school, because I grew up moving around quite a bit, and I moved, I guess technically twice in high school. Like it was kind of one was, or I guess like a very extended move. And after I had moved from to a new state, there was a period where I was like staying in a hotel and doing online school, and that was kind of a time where I think those struggles, whether it was, anxiety or certain aspects of depression started to come forth. Because I think even when I had depression, I was high functioning, but I was forced to face
Mhm.
it due to certain issues. Like by the time I got to my junior year and had settled in a new city, I noticed I couldn't focus, like, no matter what. Like, I could study, for hours, and I just couldn't focus. I couldn't remember anything. It was hard to sleep, it was just but I was like, "Why?" Like, "What's wrong with me? What's wrong with my brain? Like, why
Mhm.
can't my brain work?" And this is like that's kind of a crucial year, like, if any high schoolers are listening, that's when you're doing AP tests, you're applying to colleges, or at least thinking about it. And so it's just like,
Mhm.
why? Like, this crucial years when all of a sudden I can't seem to get it together. And, I still would,
Mhm.
just do more clubs, more things. And even at one point, like, I there was a sport that I wanted to do, but I was, like, physically I don't know what it was, if I was just, like, physically couldn't do it, or it was, like, both physical and psychological, but I, like, even had to take a break from that and, started tutoring. And, my mom would say stuff like, "Don't off yourself," or, like, I forgot, there was something, like, different things along the lines of, like, like, "You need to get it together," kinda thing. And
Mhm.
I remember that year, the whole year I was struggling, and, and, my family was being so hard on me about, like, my grades dropping, which, like, I'm already hard on myself because I'm like, I'm trying, but
Mhm.
there was just no understanding of, like, I'm struggling and I don't know why. And that was kind of when I really started like researching, do I have depression? Because I think because I was so high functioning, like I never thought like I had it. And at that time I was very still passionate about helping others too. Like I had founded a club called Project Encouragement and tried to offer mental resources through that. But honestly, up until that point, it was kind of like other people deal with mental health
Mhm.
issues, but not me. But that was a point where I'm like, oh, actually, might be me too.
We all have, some depression.
Yeah. So, that was also kind of a time too where God was kind of bringing some people of faith in my life to kind of start planting those seeds. Because yeah, after a while, like I shared, I think in earlier episodes that I grew up not necessarily having a stable spiritual life. It was kind of like back and forth. Like if I'm with grandparents, having faith, with mom, usually not doing much, sometimes going to church on my own. But during that long period of kind of moving cross country and
Mhm.
not having stability, I started, looking into other things. And so that
Mhm.
was just a hard year because was, you know, finally forced to face these mental health issues that I could no longer hide with, you know, various activities, but also um, I wasn't necessarily pursuing faith either, but kind of by the end of that year, I started going to a Christian club that definitely helped me make changes in my life. But I would say that's the main thing. I think just growing up, you know,
Mhm.
anxiety here and there. And honestly, I think anxiety is something that I've always had, but it's just because I would work, it was just like I just worked. And that was, I never really acknowledged, oh, I might have anxiety. I was just work, 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 work
Right.
until I got to a point where it's just like
Mhm.
I no longer, like, it was in those moments where, like, I, you know, was on a break, didn't have school or clubs or work or anything to back up on, where it was just me and my thoughts, and it was like, that now this wave, you know, this wave would come upon me.
Yeah.
Um,
Just a hit. It's like a wave of sadness just suddenly hit you.
yeah. But, yeah, what about you, Erica?
Yeah, but I mean, before that, like, how I wanted to ask you, how long do you think it took you to recover from that? Mhm.
Definitely the whole year was like a little by little process. Like, it was kind of me trying to self-educate, self-heal. And because I remember, like, I at one point, I don't know what it was, like, either maybe the end second half of junior year, maybe beginning of senior year, but I remember, like, I finally built up the courage to, like, tell another family member, and their response
Mhm.
was just like, kinda like, "So?" Like, "Oh," or not like, "Okay." And not in a, like, a rude way, but I
Is it
think
like a little dismissive
yeah, it was very
or
like, well, I don't
mhm,
even wanna call it dismissive because I don't think they were trying to be dismissive, and this family member was much older, so I guess retrospectively, I'm thinking, like, for their
mhm,
generation, mental health definitely wasn't an option.
right.
And I think this is, like, just reflecting on, like, communities of color and Black communities, like, for a long
Mhm,
time, like, and I may have even had a relative who said it, but, like, dealing with, like,
mhm.
depression or anxiety, it was kind of seen as, like, a luxury or something only white people deal with. And even though it, like, even though it's something that everyone deals with, but I think just because of, like, certain societal standards and expectation, and especially for
Mhm,
older generations, like grandparents, aunts and uncles, like, the things that they went through, like, it really, like, you had anxiety or depression or some type of mental illness, but, like, you didn't,
mhm,
being able to get treatment for that wasn't really an option. And kind of all across, that's a whole other conversation, all across the medical industry, like, communities of colors have always been, like, underserved and not, and have dealt with more issues without resources, but that's a conversation for another day. But, but definitely, yeah, just, uh, yeah, kind of like in retrospect, like, you know, like, in that moment, it was kind of like, "Oh, well, I'm in this on my own, so I'm gonna have to do the research." And it was kind of like, I think definitely a year of just getting to a stable point, but, you know, home life was still rocky. Like, my senior year of high school, like, I was almost every day getting threats of being kicked out. Even on my graduation, it was like it was a very unpleasant day. Um, you know, I don't wanna share too much, just but I it was just a very unstable year, and so I got to a place where I was stable, but it was still a long-term process of, like, thinking about,
mhm,
um, my nutrition, you know, starting to build my faith and relationship with God, and, having good communities, and also just, like, noticing when I'm, you know, feeling a certain way, and also, because I think a big thing that I struggled with growing up is, like, taking care of myself. I was always taking care of everyone else,
mhm,
but,
right.
like, never really, um, addressing myself. It was just like, it's my
Mhm,
purpose to help others, to make sure others are okay, and as long as I do that, I'm
mhm,
okay, but without ever, you know, but I think that
right.
that kind of was, like, the breaking point of, like, a long-term journey of taking care of myself. And once I graduated high school, like, I moved out pretty much right away. Like, it was supposed to be, like, the day of my graduation, but that didn't end up happening. Just things. So basically a month later after I graduated high school, I, you know, moved out, got my own apartment, and,
Mhm,
that was kind of a good place. I'm on my own. I could, you know, focus on my nutrition, work out, and even in college,
mhm,
like, my freshman year probably was, like, the year I put the most effort into self-care, to be honest, because I would, like, university had health services. They had, like, a massage chair and, like, a pantry, and
mhm,
I would just take advantage of all of the resources. I'm like, "I'm paying tuition, so I'm gonna take advantage of all of them."
right.
Um, And then the rest of college, it was kind of back to the grind, but I at least kind of set that foundation for really looking at my life and how I can take care of myself holistically.
Mhm. Yeah, self-care is so important. It's it's so crazy to hear all those stories, and I mean, for me, I feel like even just hearing this, I kind of feel depressed too by just hearing it. Um, but like for me personally, I don't think I've ever reached, I guess, an extreme situation where I thought of, I guess, what's the term that he used to say? Kind of like unaliving myself. But growing up, I guess, in an Asian family, communication and talking about your emotions, feelings was never really something that was available. I guess it's just a family dynamic. So, like what you said earlier, too, it's like, I think for my personality, I'm usually the person who always listens to other people. And this was all in the past. And I've never realized until later when I started seeing some, I guess, result of my actions where I would just bottle everything up. And it's mostly like, a lot of family problem that would happen or the things around me. And because I don't know how to express it, I would get super anxious. And there were a lot of days that happened in the past where I would just suddenly explode. But, I don't explode in front of people, but it's just I explode by myself, but I would literally cry all night to get it all out. And if anything though, I think at the time, like what you said, when you're young, you don't know exactly what's going on inside you or you don't even know what to do with it. So one thing I'm thankful for is I feel like I was able to caught it in early as well. And I was able to learn how to really take care of myself and try to improve on certain things and realize a lot of ways to cope with it. I mean, even right now, it's still hard. I feel like it's a lifetime thing that we have to take care of our mental health because we just face so much difficulties every single day. And even with our generation right now, we have so much access to all information and when I look at my students or even just myself too, I realized this one time because I felt so overwhelmed because, we have instant access to everything that's happening in the world, all the wars, all the problem from each nation, any crime that's happening across the country or whatever it may be. And so one day I realized I was just so overwhelmed and I almost threw my phone and I realized I was like, wow, it's actually so what is the word? Degrading? Degrading for my or it really affects my mental health so bad, even just by looking all those at all those information. And then when I realized, younger kids who have access to all that too, I feel really sad because I feel like if they don't have any adult to help them, I guess, regulate whatever they're seeing or what to do with it, then it will really affect their mental health tremendously. So looking back, I guess, at my life as well, looking at my life, one thing is that, you were mentioning it earlier, is that mental health is something that we don't really talk about and we kind of just I guess the older people tell us to just get over it. But again, I think that's the um generational difference is that they don't know how to cope with that because that wasn't the problem that they mainly focused during their time as well. And they had it, but they don't know how to cope with it as well. So they always just had carry it and pass it down. But yeah, I think for me, really, it's just I had those anxiety because I never learned how to really learn how to regulate my emotions. I don't know how to do that in the past, and it was so hard before. I would have some panic attacks without realizing what was happening, and I think that's the hardest part. It's like when something is going on with you and you don't know exactly what it was for, and you just start crying. I remember whenever it happens, I would drive up a hill and I would just stay there for like an hour or two, and I would just start crying. And at the time, I was already going to church. So I remember I would just pray and really vent to God about everything. But I feel like because of that, God had also really healed whatever was wrong inside me. Or I guess not wrong, whatever was going on inside me. Because every time I do that, I really felt so much peace in my heart. And it became a coping strategy to me. So I'm really thankful to that. But yeah, those are just, I guess, a bit of my personal experience with mental health.
I was just thinking when you even when you first started, I was like, "Same girl, same." The amount of time I cried myself to sleep, like, too many pillows. Oh, not to be too unserious, but I remember there was a point in my life where I was crying so much, I was like, "I'm sick of it. I'm sick of myself. I'm sick of crying." Like, I was so crying. I was like,
Yeah, I
"I'm
don't
crying,
know. I
crying."
don't know if that's also an only child thing. Me and Kiera are both only child, so I don't know if that was a factor to that. But yeah, it you get tired of it.
But man, I really loved how you kind of shared like that point where you would like drive up the hill and then at one point you kind of felt this weight being lifted. And that was something that I had experienced too. Like after I came to God, like one way anxiety would manifest in me is like my body would be in a constant state of tension to the point like where it was
Mhm,
like my normal. Like I remember I went to a massage session and they put like a TENS machine and put it on 10 and I couldn't even feel it.
mhm.
Like that's how tight my muscles were. And I
Oh my
remember
god. I had the same experience, but it was like an actual person massaging me. And so she was basically, really putting so much effort because she was like, "Wow, your back is so tense. Like, what do you do with your life? Like, how old are you?" And she was asking me at the time, and she was like, "Do you want me to go softer or harder?" I was like, "Just please go harder. I wanna feel it."
but yeah, like it's so rough, but like that like I guess coming back to faith, it's like when you there's a certain point where like you give it all to God and it's like that weight is lifted. Like I remember,
Right.
there was a point where I had first started like as an adult learning the word and finish and was very active in my faith where I was like, "Wait, my shoulders, they're resting, they're loose, like, they're not tight?" Like, I was like, "What is this?" Like, jumping my shoulders around because I'm like, is this what life is like? Is this what people feel daily?" Like
So for the first time.
yeah.
Oh my
For the
gosh.
first time and forever.
Oh gosh, no depression.
But yeah, it's and I really love too how you mentioned like our generation we get so much slack about being sensitive and whatever
Mhm,
and in some ways I do think like there are certain times where it's like okay we gotta yeah we need to be a little bit more resilient but I think overall like I'm so proud of our generation because
mhm.
we're addressing these things like because
Right.
our parents our grandparents our great grandparents even though like they're tough like they still had mental issues, and you can watch them, and you can see that when they're going through things, they may not acknowledge
Yeah.
it, but it's like they went through so much, and especially when I think about the things that my grandmother, great grandmother, even until this day, my mom, she will not talk about anything that she's been through. It's like lip
Mhm.
sealed, but like hearing stories from you know my grandmother, like, I mean, I guess just to respect them, I won't go into detail, but it's like so many things from, like, as young
Mhm.
as or I guess I'll share for one of my great grandmothers, like, I think when she was 5 years old, she literally had, like, ran away from an abusive home, like, from South Florida to New York, like,
Wow.
it was, like,
Mhm.
so crazy, and even just, different members of my family member who, dealt with, sexual assault or attempted attempted assaults against them. There are just so many things where like, there was never a safe space for them to be able to talk about those things. But I'm just so grateful that our generation can finally address these things, and I think they're like, we'll be, a little super sensitive at first, but I think at some point, we'll get to that point to where we're able to, um, acknowledge and work through what we need to work through, but also still, continue on being resilient.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I am really happy that we have more awareness on these things, and I guess it's more acceptable at this time, and it's not something that people just, I guess, take lightly. It's not something that people would just, I guess, dismiss or ignore, but really, it's a real issue, and I'm really glad that we're all in this together as a generation. I guess we're all generation what? Z, millennial, and alpha. going through the same mental health depression crisis. We all got problems. That's why we're trying our best to solve it. The
Yeah.
past generation couldn't help us anymore. Okay, now that we are able to unload some of our drama and talk about our mental health struggles, we are now going to move on into our next segment.
Thank you all for listening to Erica and I's conversation about our struggles with mental health and how faith and also tools that we have access to in the world have allowed us to grow and overcome these things. But on that note, we'd like to welcome up a very special guest, Steve Handy. He is a social worker registered in the Ontario College of Social Workers and Social Service Workers. He works as a mental health clinician in Northwestern Ontario, Canada, and employs a variety of psychotherapy tools to support his clients to improve their lives and achieve their goals. Having come to the gospel as an adult, he has been a follower of Jesus for 18 years. So, everyone, without further ado, please welcome up Steve Handy.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be here, Kiera. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for being here. Apart from your this very beautiful intro or that you've written about yourself, who are you and what do you do? If there's anything else you'd like to share.
Trying to think of what would be relevant here. I mean, I'm a mental health clinician, which means I'll see individuals or couples or sometimes family units, and I'll chat with them about some of their relationship struggles, their mental health struggles, and I'll use various, psychotherapy tools and communication skills and other types of skill building to help them resolve those things or manage them and to live the kind of lives they really want to live.
Thank you. And this is very necessary. It seems like the mental health struggles are increasing exponentially day by day.
For sure. Yeah.
But before we hop into the nitty gritty, could you tell us a little bit about your relationship with faith?
Sure. Kind of in a nutshell, I'd gone to a Catholic school when I was very, very young, and then when I left that school, I just kind of kept had this idea that God was there, but I didn't really pursue that. And I kind of had this general belief in God till the end of high school, and then actually I stopped in university. I completely stopped and went full blown atheist, really. But even then, I after a couple years, I started to become more and more interested in spiritual things generally. I explored a few other routes, and then finally settled on Jesus and the Bible when I was in my early 30s. So, that was, I think, like I said earlier, it's been about 18 years ago now, and so yeah, and so that is a huge part of my life, and I'm very happy and very blessed to have been saved. Very thankful for
Well,
a lot of ways, yeah, for a lot of reasons, yeah.
so I guess what was that? Was there a trigger point, like some big event in your life that made you think, okay, I really need God right now?
Well, I'd been kind of searching spiritually, like I said, and but eventually I ended up, facing my own mental health struggles as well. I got into pretty deep depression, but didn't realize that it was depression. And as I, went through quite a few years of being in a very dark and sad place and not knowing what to do with it. I was searching spiritually at the same time, and I remember, even to the point of thinking of, if this sort of pain goes on for much longer, I don't think I'm going to make it. I think I'm probably gonna commit suicide. And I remember at that time kind of looking up because I wasn't a believer at the time, but I was doing that search and I kind of looked up into this kind of the sky and said, whatever's out there, because I had this feeling something's there. I don't know what it is, but like whatever you are, uh, this is my situation. I'm in this pain. I can't stand it for much longer. And and I cried out for help, you know, uh, and when I did and kind of, um, yeah, I opened up that possibility, I started to notice over the next few weeks that things in my life started to change, like without me having any particular direct impact on them. But just noticing these little changes, I'm like, oh my gosh, these are all the things that seem to be having such a huge impact on making me feel this way right now. And they're all kind of being resolved. And uh as that took place, I kind of got this deep sense that just let it happen, you know, don't get in the way, just let it happen. And so I did. And within a few, fortunately, over the next few weeks and months, all those issues were resolved. I was feeling so much better. And then probably about 3 months after that kind of call for help, maybe a little bit longer, I was introduced to a set of Bible studies, and through these Bible studies, I was shocked. It kind of blew my spiritual eyes open, sort of thing. I'm like, oh my gosh, God exists. It's like he's been doing all of this work and kind of calling me here to learn these Bible studies and get to know Him and get to know about Jesus. And so that had a huge impact on me and on my mental health and of course my faith, right? So yeah, ever since then, it's not like all the mental health struggles are completely gone. It's not like my relationship with God and Jesus has just been soaring and perfect ever since. There are struggles that take place as we grow. I think that's normal and natural, but I'm very happy. I'm so happy that he called me the way he did and took care of me at that time. Yeah.
Wow, that's so amazing. It's like you called and God answered right away. It's just like, I've been waiting.
Yeah, it really feels like that in a lot of ways. Yeah. So yeah, deep thanks for him.
Mm.
Deep love for him too for having done that.
Well, on the note of mental health, would you mind defining mental health from a clinical standpoint of view, and sharing any terms that you might use throughout this interview?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, a huge switch in topic now.
Oh,
We're
yeah.
going like, and it's fine. It's fine because I feel like I'm going, oh, so spiritual. And now we're going like, now we're hitting it like, oh yeah, very kind of secular humanistic, kind of clinical. So but it's cool. So yeah, trying to define mental health. I mean, I appreciate you having sent me some of the questions beforehand so I could think about it. And I think, wow, how do I define mental health? That's huge. And I think yeah, when I was thinking about how to answer that, I was thinking, wow, there's so many different approaches to psychotherapy and so many different nuances to them. And they all have slightly different approaches to promoting mental health. Um, uh, how can I put all that together? I think there's a tendency for us to think of mental health as solely about what goes on in our minds, the thoughts we're having, the emotions we're having. But that's really too narrow. Like our mental health is so intricately connected to our behavior and actions, our physiological responses. What is going on in our heart rate, um, in the hormones in our nervous system, what is going on with our physical health, our genetics and biochemistry, right? As well as more external factors like the social, the economic, the cultural context, past experiences of our own past experiences of our parents and grandparents, and the list kind of goes on. And particularly as a social worker, I tend to look at it from that broader perspective. Like, what are all of these factors that may be impacting on this person's, what we're calling mental health? Um, so that's one way we tend to go very narrow. And the other way we tend to go very narrow is when we think, oh, having good mental health is just about being happy all the time, being free of stress and of anxiety or anger. Um, so what I did, I took a look online and found a very reliable source, which is the World Health Organization. I said, oh, they've got a great definition, so I'll use that for today, anyways. And what they've got in a 2022 fact sheet, and I'll provide you with the link to that fact sheet later on. Mental health is a state of mental well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, realize their abilities, learn well and work well, and contribute to their community. And yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that hits all these different aspects about how we can have this sense of well-being in our lives, really not just for our own sake, but for the sake of all the people that we touch in our lives as well, and moving forward, as a community and into our future.
Yeah, so it sounds like a very holistic thing. You have to look at it holistically. You can't just go at it from one one direction. It really made me think of how it's like our mental and spiritual health are like so deeply intertwined.
Oh, absolutely. Right. And I'd mentioned about the cultural context and stuff, and spirituality from a lot of different perspectives. Whatever perspective it is, it clearly has an impact on mental health, and our faith and the tenets of that faith, how we feel we're living that faith, all of that will have an impact on us too, as well as the struggle with how others may see us, and how they may evaluate, I'll say, whether or not we're living up to the tenets of that particular faith too, and that can have an impact on our mental health. So all of these things are part and parcel, and because there's so many possible things that could be impacting on our mental health, and our mental health impacts on so many other things, taking the time to go through the investigation with someone about, hey, what is going on in your life? What are these different factors? Is really important, understanding them. Um, and also taking an approach which is non-judgmental, right? We know we're not supposed to judge our neighbors, but it's so easy, right? But one of the things that I really learned through becoming a social worker, and learning about mental health, and really learning about, hey, I may meet someone and I might not like what they're doing, and I might even look down on what they're doing, but I don't know why they're doing it. And whatever that is, there can be all sorts of stuff that I just have no access to. So really can't be judgmental about it, because I don't know. God knows I don't.
And that's like a whole nother level of love your neighbor.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to ask you, as a mental health specialist, what are some common misconceptions that you often hear about mental health, especially from communities of faith or as it relates to faith? Because you touched a little bit on how like even like expectations that you may have within a certain spiritual religious community that can also have a big impact on one's mental health.
Sure, and I think especially as people of faith, we often think about things like, sin and righteousness, right? And we might see someone doing something, and we might think that they're sinning in some way, because we're, you know, connecting it to a particular scripture. Oh, this goes against one of the Ten Commandments, or this goes against what Jesus says, or whatever, right? Um, and so I think one of the things that can happen is that when people struggle with mental health, and when people are struggling with, various types of addictions and all of these things, uh, yeah, when we take a look at it from a spiritual doctrinal perspective, it's really easy to fall into, hey, this person is sinning, they are wrong, they are not righteous, they are not whatever, right? And then, of course, um, that can have a terrible impact on the person who's actually struggling with that, because it doesn't necessarily mean that they're wanting to be doing those things. You had talked earlier yourself about how some of the things that you were doing, they were useful things and productive things, but they were also a way of coping with particular circumstances in your life, right? Now, someone from the outside doesn't know all that background about you, right? But uh, I'm gonna destroy a quote that I heard fairly recently, but it was something like, it's not about the addiction, it's about the emptiness that the addiction is covering, right? And so when we look at something on face value, oh, this person is doing drugs, or they have this particular addiction, whatever it is, it can be, you know, even something like spending, doom scrolling for hours on end, or or whatever, like pornography or anything like that. These things can come up and say, oh, this is sin, 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 sin. Um, at the same time, again, there's this tendency to just go directly to that and become very judgmental, and then not seeing the pieces of that person's life that have led them to that in the first place, and what those pieces are. And by adding that negative connotation, as other people in the faith community, people recognize that. They've been in the community. They know what they can, people can, whether they can feel it or whether they can sense it from the conversations that go around, the conversations that we might be having very casually, but people pick up, you know, is this a safe place for me to get help? Is this a safe place for me to be able to overcome what I'm overcoming, and or what I need to overcome? And so if the faith community is not open to having those sorts of discussions, or is automatically negative about that or judgmental about it. I'm not saying the behavior is right or good or anything, but the question is this a place where someone can speak about it in a way that they're going to be able to unveil and reveal, and sometimes get at the things that they may not even know themselves, in order to be able to address what's going on underneath those, that addiction, or whatever behavior that is, right? And so that tendency to be negative and judgmental and focus on, is it sin or not, um, especially as human beings, right? Because like I said, we don't know all that stuff. God does. So we can actually create an atmosphere that is counterproductive to someone healing, and even being willing to stay within that faith community while they go through the struggle of healing and overcoming those things. That's one thing that I've seen, and I can imagine happening in a lot of faith communities. Not all of them, it really depends. I can't blanket everything, but that is a tendency I've seen sometimes.
And what are some ways that people can begin to address these misconceptions with education, open dialogue? Like,
Great question. There are places that, because I think sometimes a common response to mental illness is, well, you just need to pray, you just need to read the Bible more. And so again, that sort of mentality limits the openness with which people will access resources that would be really, really helpful. Right? So I know for I know, in Canada, I'm in Canada, right? So we have something called the Canadian Mental Health Association, and they have tons of resources, and there's all sorts of, you can access all sorts of resources, get lots of information. I'm sure that in America there's something similar. I was looking it up, actually, and I think it was the National Alliance on Mental Illness. That's one place that you could possibly go, just to get more information and kind of do the research, starting from there. I'm sure there's other ones. There's probably one for each state as well. So checking in on that sort of thing. If you know someone who is a mental health professional, asking some questions. There's bound to be some phone numbers you can call on some of those, on the websites of some of those organizations, where you can talk to someone. I know there's crisis lines for people who are actually having struggles in mental health, and they can call those numbers and say, okay, where can I get that help? So part of it'll be finding it out for each particular area, wherever they are in America. So there's that piece. There are clinicians out there who are Christians and will do things from a Christian perspective, using really well researched and well documented techniques in psychotherapy. So there are those sorts of people out there. So if you want to know, you can always try and connect to a therapist, or and find out what their background is, what their approach is. There's a lot of actually secular therapists out there. They may not be Christian, but because they are able to go along with whatever the perspective, the spiritual perspective of whoever they're working with, they're willing to learn about those perspectives and use those perspectives as they do the work with the person that they're seeing. So there's those people out there as well. Tons of resources, tons of resources. If you're going to school, there's going to be your campus counseling agency, I'm sure. There's guidance counselors at high schools, and they'll all be, even if they don't necessarily have all the information and resources they need, they'll be able to point you in the right direction.
So you kind of answered my next question about how faith-based communities can educate themselves. But if there's anything you want to add to that, please do before I transition to the a follow-up question.
Yeah, sure. I'm talking about ones that are more based on psychotherapy principles that have been worked through for a long period of time. There's also ones that are more specifically related to a Christian community, for example. I've heard people telling me about how they've, at their churches in the past, they've connected to counselors there, and they appreciated the counseling and therapy that they got through that. And the training that those pastors and counselors had was specifically related to their Christian faith and their particular denomination. So there's that type as well. And so there's a lot of overlap. So that's, something else that people can be paying attention to, looking for as well.
One thing that's always on my mind, like I constantly hear so many people like maybe they start therapy and then they end up leaving faith because their therapist is like super secular. Like maybe their therapist isn't neutral, so they point to like, oh, like
Mhm.
your faith is the source of your problems, or maybe because a lot of people, maybe they have a church community that is not healthy, and they're not able to differentiate like faith versus that relationship with God. And so I guess my question is like, what is one way that we can engage with others who might really insist on the idea that it's the faith, it's like the source of their mental health, even though it's something that um, is ultimately meant to heal, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, it's one of the tricky things because, even as therapists, we're human, right? And we have particular perspectives, and part of our jobs as therapists is really to pay attention to what our own um what our own thoughts and biases and emotions can be, and what sorts of things trigger us, so that as I'm talking to someone, they might say something that really shocks me, but if I fly off the handle because of that, then I'm not going to be much good to this person, right? So one of my jobs as a therapist is always to be aware of my own biases, my own thoughts, my own stereotypes, my own triggers from my own past that I might not have finished healing yet in some way, because we've all got our stuff. And so, yeah, that can happen when people let their biases and their own judgments enter into the therapy in a way that ends up potentially harming the person they're working with, the client they're working with. And more specific example, like you said, can end up leading someone to leave their life of faith, even though that life of faith could have been a very healthy and supportive, um, and supportive of their mental health and spiritual health too. Uh, and is that's something that the client too needs to be aware of, right? That the difficulty is the client's in a very vulnerable position. They're already struggling. They're placing their trust in this other human being, as a way of finding some sort of uh, relief and release and healing. So when it comes to engaging with a clinician who starts to take that approach, um, I mean, being aware that clinicians are human too, and being able to set it can be really difficult again because of the vulnerability there in the relationship and the power dynamic in the relationship. But um, being willing to say, "Hey, I am not interested in leaving my faith. So as long as you're willing to um, as long as you're willing to support me in that and work on these, you know, these other things that I want to work on, keeping that in mind, then we're good to go. Aside from that, though, I'm going to have to find another therapist, right? That's one way of looking at it, you know. Um, at the same time, I know, like I said, I know that can be really, really difficult to do. And especially because sometimes if, as you mentioned too, that the faith community doesn't seem supportive with regards to mental health, then that person is can feel kind of stuck in the middle and torn. And it's one of the reasons I think the conversation we're having today is so important, so that faith communities can be aware of these sorts of issues in a supportive way and in a non-judgmental way, so that the person can find that support there and work through with, you know, their pastors and church leaders, while at the same time, if they need to, being able to get the help from a clinician who may not be part of their church, but who can give them, you know, help them work through whatever background stuff is there, help them gain the new skills, you know, the behavioral skills, the emotional and mental skills, to be able to help them out. Um, it's tricky. You know, I don't want to say anything that's going to blanket, oh, you should do this, because everybody's situation is going to be different, you know. But it's something that, as a person of faith, going to a mental health clinician, whether it be a psychologist or social worker or whoever, then knowing what your own line is going to be in terms of that, saying, okay, I'm not leaving my church community, so we can work around that, right? Or um, I'm not leaving my relationship with God, you know, so we'll work around that, you know. The clinician should be supportive of that, you know, because as I understand it, we're working towards fulfilling the client's goals, not our own goals. Does that make sense?
It does, and I wish there were more more therapists that were, that professional and um, able to draw that line, because at least I think within American culture, at least it seems like there's been a lot of not as many therapists are neutral in that regard. Like people, they
Mm,
kind of try to find a therapist who's going to tell them what they want to hear. It seems like there's been a big shift in that happening in the States, but
oh,
I'm not a mental health professional. This is just from, things that I've heard from professionals actually who are in that field talking about it, people that I know who have their therapists, and kind of seeing the result of their life. Yeah, I don't know. It seems like it may be like just with cultural change, more of like the industry being influenced by certain social cultural phenomena.
absolutely. Yeah. And every profession kind of goes along with the social and cultural, you know, dynamics, right? And what's I don't want to say in vogue, but what, you know, how the society is developing. And um I think there can be, you know, as values change, there can be a lot of backlash against, for example, communities that have different values to what are being expressed as the norm now. And I'm not saying that all of those values shouldn't be changing, or anything like that. But what often ends up getting lost, I think, is where is this person in their own struggles? Where are they in their own life and in their context, working with the person, the client, you know, to kind of figure out, okay, what are all of these dynamics? How do you understand them? And then working with that client along with their understanding and providing suggestions and possibilities and opening up discussion, but always leaving it in the hands of the client themselves to make the decision about what approach they want to take and how we as clinicians sh should be supporting that. And even if it's something we truly believe to be the case and want to and really want the client to do, being willing to take the step and say, hey, but this is not my decision. It is up to it is their choice, and supporting them with that.
Thank you. So I guess before the step of therapy or pursuing some sort of professional help, are there any kind of practical day-to-day ways that can help people to manage their mental health in a positive, productive way?
Oh, sure. Talking kind of from a Christian perspective, there are kind of the basic faith things that can definitely help, right? Prayer, um, you know, keeping our mind on God's word, so reading the Bible and all those pieces of basic faith, praise and stuff. Um, Along with that, there are so many other things that we can be doing on a daily basis. Things like a little bit of exercise every day makes a huge difference, and even if it's not every day, regular exercise, because that creates all sorts of gets all sorts of hormones and chemicals and endorphins and whatever else going on in our bodies, so that it helps us feel better, helps us get rid of stress. um, Also, things like Thanksgiving, and from a Christian context, we always say, "Hey, Thanksgiving to God." Writing a list of things like 10 things that you're thankful for, just writing them down every morning, and just being aware of those things and thanking God for those things. That helps us, have a positive mindset throughout the course of the day. I find personally myself doing some sort of mindfulness practice, whether some people like meditation or body scanning, so they're relaxing their bodies bit by bit, or even just taking a very mindful walk where you're going for a walk and you're just really noticing the environment around you, the feeling of the wind, the press of your steps into the ground, and the temperature, and all of these pieces, the sounds that are going on, really being present in the moment is really important, because so much of our day is spent with our minds scattered here and there and all over the place. We kind of forget to come back to the present moment, and a lot of times it's in the present moment when we're going to be able to feel the most peace, because we're not freaking out about the future, and we're not freaking out about the past. Because in a lot of cases, for many of us, being in that present moment is a safe place, and there's there may be there's nothing around us that is particularly stressful in that moment. Again, I'm generalizing, right? But mindfulness practices can really help that way. A social support is a huge thing. Social support is a huge factor in people being able to manage mental health, solve problems. Sometimes it's with others solving the problems. Sometimes it's just, hey, you've got someone you're able to tell your heart to. That can make a big difference too. So having a some good friends, relationships with your family and stuff like that, as much as you can, that can be really helpful as well. There's so many things, but it's great that you're asking these questions, because the fact that you're asking these questions, it means that, yeah, the answers people don't necessarily know right away, and so that means that a lot of people aren't doing things that they could be doing. Really simple things that can help maintain their mental health and get through the day in healthy and productive ways, that could, in the end, prevent them needing to go see a clinician, a psychotherapist or something.
So, since we've discussed kind of what your everyday person can do on an individual level, what types of resources there are on a broader scale, could you talk specifically about what people in a leadership role, like what are maybe like three things that if someone is going to be a leader, whether within a spiritual community or a secular community, what are three things or more that you think they should absolutely learn about, practices that they should have to make sure that they as their leader are able to serve those and also be an example for people who look up to them?
Oh, specifically related to mental health, you mean, or yeah.
Yeah, specifically like in regards to mental health, what are some things that if someone is going to be a leader, things that they need to know or be able to actively put into practice every day?
Uh, First of all, really having a non-judgmental attitude is really important. Um, and I think part of that comes from, yeah, us learning not to judge. Yeah, I wish sorry, I'm not great at being able to drop a scripture right right off the top of my right off the tip of my tongue, but um uh basically I believe there's a scripture Jesus says that God will we shouldn't be judging, right? God will judge at the appointed time. He will reveal everything in people's hearts, something like that. Sorry, terrible, but the idea that we don't know what's going on in people's lives. And even though we have a very often have a very strong sense of right and wrong because, we believe in God, we believe in good and evil and all that. Um, it's one thing to know about good and evil. It's another thing to, and we might even be able to say, oh, this is sin or not, right? But because we don't know all the background behind it to judge someone and express that judgment, uh, is, uh, I think, really counterproductive because it can alienate people who are struggling. It can make it that much more difficult for that person to get support, not even from the church, but from somewhere else, because now they think they're evil and they're bad. And that stigma can be carried in a way that, well, they're just not going to get the support they need, when if they got the support, they would be able to get through it. Right. And so creating a non-judgmental atmosphere, not just in interacting with someone who may be experiencing mental health issues, but generally speaking, you know, generally speaking, so that, even in the conversations we have here or there, we don't know who's listening and what's going on in their minds. We don't know their backgrounds. And the other point is, there's a couple pieces. There was a pastor who I really do value the things he said, and he said that from God's perspective, everybody has mental illness, right? Like, oh wow, oh my gosh, right? So that means, hey, if I'm saying, oh, that person's got mental struggles and whatever else, and that's a problem and whatever else, well, you know what? We've got them too. So and I've heard it similarly put by a psychologist who said, when he's with his clients, he says, you know what, I have, uh, you're climbing your mountain, but I'm climbing my mountain too, and I may see some things as I'm climbing my mountain. I may see some things, that you're doing on your mountain that might be helpful, some things that you could do, some different directions you can take or whatever else, but he always keeps in mind and he expresses to his clients, hey, I'm on my mountain too. I have not reached the top of my mountain. So that's a really, I think, important perspective when we try and engage with people who are struggling with mental health stuff, uh, in a way that is collaborative and and it takes away the, hey, I'm going to fix you sort of perspective, and it takes away the judgment too, because, like I said, we've each got our own stuff, you know. So that's one piece, that non-judgmental attitude. The other piece is the willingness to, um, remember that we don't know everything. God knows everything, but we don't. And so whatever strategies we may, have learned ourselves to deal with our own mental health stuff doesn't mean that those same things will apply to someone else. And just because we may be able to use, um, prayer and the Bible and whatever else to resolve the issues and problems and mental health struggles that we're dealing with, doesn't mean that all of those transfer simply to someone else. There's a lot of other stuff that person is coming from, that person has. And so one thing is recognizing our limits in terms of being able to support the other person, And at the same time, when we know that we have hit our limits, being able to say, you know what, I don't know where else to go in order to help you. So let me help you find someone who does, who can support you. Right? I think that's really important. It takes a humility to be able to do that, and a willingness to say, yeah, hey, I don't know everything. My stuff may be okay right now. Using the strategies that I use for me, some of those strategies may apply to this other person, but maybe none of them do. So let's not say, okay, there's just something wrong with them. Let's help them get to someone who can provide that support and work with the person to find the solutions that they need. Okay. So that's two. I think if there's one more, willingness to listen. I think as leaders, and even myself as a clinician, I gotta know when to shut up. Really, you know. Um, Sometimes we get so involved in the role of being a leader or a clinician or whatever, and so we're like telling people stuff that we may be missing the mark, and we're just throwing a whole bunch of darts at the dartboard, but we are never hitting the bullseye because we're not listening, and we've got too focused on our own needs, uh, rather than really the needs of the person that has come to us for that support. So we have to be willing to spend sometimes a lot of time and a lot of patience, but that's okay, because as we build that connection with them, and the more they're able to express what's really going on in their hearts, and all those different facets that I opened up with, the external stuff, the past stuff, the future stuff, the physical stuff and the physiological stuff, all of that stuff, the more we know, the more we can support, or at least the more we can help them find the direction so that they can get the support that they need. How's that?
That sounds amazing, and I especially loved your point about humility, and I think when it comes to helping people, especially as leaders, I don't know if humility even comes to mind because maybe they really just wanna help this person, but, like, because they don't it just doesn't cross their mind that, like, maybe I just need to step down and hand this off to someone else. Um
Mhm. Yeah, and having been a leader in the church, and now too as someone who does psychotherapy with people, um, I now that I'm in this position doing psychotherapy, and less on the direct leadership side in a church, I can see a lot of the things that I used to do, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? Because now I'm a little more formally trained in paying attention to myself, paying attention to, hey, what are my needs in all of this? Why did I say that? What was my purpose in getting that? And what was I trying to accomplish? And then sometimes the answer is, oh, that's my own stuff. That has to do with my own need to solve problems. That has to do with my own, you know, stuff in my own relationships that's coming out, rather than really being in tune with the person who's there, who's come to me for the support you know and so being able to recognize when those things are affecting me, and knowing the limits, and being honest when, hey, if I don't have, it's not even about, sometimes we get into the trap of thinking we have to have the answer because we're leaders or because we're therapists or whatever, but really it's about working with the person to figure out the solutions and the strategies that are going to work for them. And that's a different mindset, but it's a really important mindset, especially when we're dealing with something that can be so serious at times, and so devastating to a person as their mental health.
Thank you. I think that's all of the questions that I have for you, apart from any final resources that you'd like to share, any final, words and resources.
I guess just a sense that everybody does struggle with mental health, including leaders, and including therapists too, and in that sense, it is better to be able to have open conversations about that, to be able to look at ourselves and be honest with ourselves, so that we can engage with others, so that we can engage with the supports that we need. In terms of, yeah, so I think uh, uh, it's a very valuable thing for people to be doing, is really thinking about that and being willing to support each other in mental health stuff, in a church community, in other communities, you know. In terms of resources, I can probably, come up with a couple websites or something like that that you can probably post. Is it possible to post them somewhere with the podcast?
Yes, we have a website, absolutefaithwithin.com, and I think we should actually make a tab on the website with all the resources. But yeah, we'll for sure in our podcast description. So on whatever platform people listen on, they'll have those links available. And we'll also at some point have a section on our website as well.
Sure. That sounds great. Yeah. And we'll find some stuff that is kind of generally about, mental health management kind of on a daily basis. And then, yeah, we'll come up with some links and some phone numbers if they need some help, and they can access those resources. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And for our American listeners, I do have a few organizations I can list off right now, and they'll be included in the description along with uh, Steve's recommendations as well. There's the National Alliance on Mental Illness, so NAMI, Mental Health America, National Institute for Mental Health, and the Brain and Behavior Research Foundation, just to name a few. But yeah,
Great. Thank you very much.
thank you so much for joining us today. It was such a pleasure um, hearing about your experience in the industry as a clinician, but also your journey with faith and how it was ultimately your mental health struggles that brought you back to God.
Yeah. 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 Mental health, struggling with health can be, in the long run, be a blessing too, especially if it brings us to God and helps us build that relationship with Him. So, yeah, it definitely was a struggle, but I'm so thankful that he got me through it in the way he did. And I really want to thank you for addressing this topic, because I know that it's not an easy topic to talk about in a lot of faith communities. So really appreciate that you're opening it up and having that conversation and allowing people to be more aware of it and open about it themselves. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any final words? Last call?
No, again, thank you very much. And I really want to thank God, the Holy Spirit, and Jesus, who have given us, the Bible with which to help take care of our mental and emotional health, but as I've also worked through, people in psychology and in, the various mental health disciplines, because, God certainly works through our faith, but He's also working for all of us in all of these other areas to help bring this information together, because He really does love every single one of us, and He really wants us to live the best possible lives we can. And so He's working in all sorts of ways. So I want to thank Him for making all of the resources possible, biblical resources, and of course, all the mental health resources that are out there too. He's
Amen.
great.
Amen. God, you are the best.
Amen.
Really, I'm just like, I would probably be a homeless vagrant if God hadn't been just like, oh man, I'm just like, I don't want to think about the life that I would be living if I were not a believer and lover of God, or if God specifically had not been with me my entire life.
You and me both.
Yeah, I think about my
Okay.
life and all of the struggles that I've been through. I'm like, lots of people who've been through the same things, they're like homeless, on drugs, doing whatever. But
Mhm.
I really felt like God put this little bubble around me. Um,
Hallelujah.
yeah, and that's not to say that, God hasn't protected people who, gone through those struggles either. But um, just, yeah, when I think about my life, I'm just incredibly grateful.
Thank you for the courage for sharing that too.
Yeah.
It's not an easy thing to do. Like we were talking about, right? It's not easy to be able to share those things, but you doing so, I think is going to be it's really helpful for those people who are not sure what to do with all of this stuff that may be pent up inside. But now they have, oh, yeah, Kiera did that, Erica did that. So yeah, that's great.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to Absolute Faith Within. Please do feel free to give us a like, to comment, to share, especially for anyone you know who may be dealing with mental health. And remember, we will have resources down below in the caption and comments. And you can also find resources over at absolutefaithwithin.com. Thank you so much. This has been Absolute Faith Within.